Welcome to Capitol Report, a weekly discussion with your elected officials on the issues and concerns that affect you.
And good evening. Thanks for taking the time to be with us. I'm David Nicholas. Governor Rick Snyder has appointed an emergency manager for the city of Detroit. We'll get another take on how this issue might have an impact statewide. Also, we'll take an extensive look with our guest, the legislator who has reintroduced legislation to take on the issue of human trafficking, as we welcome in State Senator Judy Emmons, a Republican from Sheridan, serving in the 5th largest Senate district in the state, District 33. Welcome, Senator. It's good to have you here.
Good to be here, Dave. Thank you.
The issue of human trafficking has been very involved for you so far in this term, and we'll get to that as we noted in depth during our conversation today. But now that the EFM has been appointed for the city of Detroit, we have been wanting to gauge with our central and northern Michigan lawmakers the view from outstate on the statewide impact or these issues as it's playing up north affecting Michigan's largest city, the take that you have and maybe what your constituents are telling you.
You know, my constituents are aware. They're not real concerned about how it's going to impact them just yet. But we know that anything that affects the largest city in our state impacts the entire state, across the bridge into the UP. But my constituents realize that there's more to come on this particular issue.
What about the statute as it stands right now? I mean, when again we take the look at it from an up north or an outstate perspective in terms of how it could potentially impact other communities, the statute now as we have seen it being applied to Michigan's largest city, again, the reaction there.
Well, you know, the whole issue with an emergency manager is the fact that a city or municipality is in a position where they can't meet their obligations and they're continuing to fall deeper and deeper into a hole. Whether it's the largest city or the next smallest city. I think our folks realize that responsibility, accountability is very important. And our district, thankfully, has been very well managed. There are challenges throughout the counties, the townships, and the cities, but for the most part, our district has been very well managed, and it's a pleasure, really, to work with the folks who run our cities and all our governing structures.
This issue was addressed to a certain extent with one of 6 ballot questions that went before the voters in November. All 6 of those went down to defeat. So the issue or the statute as it stands now, workable, yes, and what does it say to you for issues that are not resolved in Lansing going on to the ballot process? Did November send us any signal or to you and your colleagues in Lansing as to how we address a range of issues as we saw in November?
Well, of course, anytime you put something on a ballot, you're going to have both sides of an issue spend enormous amounts of monies to be the proponent of their side of the issue. And I think what it did teach us is that our voters are very savvy. They study the issues, they become knowledgeable, they are aware once they go into the ballot booth exactly what their yes or their no vote is going to do. And for me personally, as the senator for this area, that was my goal, to make sure that they understood exactly what their yes vote did, what their no vote did. And I will give folks credit that they study and they make sure they're educated before they vote.
It gets us then, at least as a segue, to the main focus for our conversation today, and that is the issue of human trafficking. Not to put this issue in the same category as those others, but it was an unresolved issue, and that you had a bill that was in session last term, did not move forward. What happened to the bill then, and how has it been restructured in any way as it's now being reintroduced in this term?
Well, this is a bill that addresses a gap in the law that was moved in prior sessions. And previously, those individuals, children primarily, who are trafficked under the age of 16, we increased the penalties for the so-called Johns, who would procure their services. And somehow in the whole process, the 16 and 17-year-olds, still that issue was a misdemeanor for someone to procure them, and the fine was negligible. So what we did was introduce legislation to increase the penalty for 16 and 17-year-olds, increase it to a $10,000. Part of it is an increase to a $10,000 fine, and increase the circumstances where it will be a felony. So that's our goal, and that will be just one of many issues I think you will see addressed in legislation regarding human trafficking.
Some terms and issues then that you brought up in the answer to that question. To the broader issue then, when we talk about human trafficking, this is the chance really to bring everyone perhaps up to speed and an understanding of what we are talking about. Is this simply a question of prostitution, or what is the scope of it overall for those who are not as familiar with the term?
Human trafficking can span many I guess definitions. You are coercing, you are forcing, you're blackmailing. If you are a trafficker, an individual, it could be a child, it could be a young woman, it could be a young man, but it's by force, it's by threats, and you are using them for personal and financial gain. In Michigan, we are presumed to be about number 13 in the country as far as the amount of trafficking that goes on. There are those involved in the industry who have come out of situations who believe that Michigan may be as high as number 5. And part of that's due to our international borders, our corridor, our 94 corridor between Detroit, Chicago. But it's a significant issue. They estimate about 115 individuals per month in Michigan are trafficked.
When you started looking at that, did that number shock you?
Absolutely. I had no idea. And the interesting thing about this particular issue is gangs, the mafia, organized crime, they are gaining a greater interest in this because you can only sell a packet of drugs once. You can sell an individual over and over. And from what I understand, talking with the folks who've come out of this situation, a person, a trafficker who has maybe 6 girls on the street can make upwards of $500,000 a year.
Where do we see it happening? You mentioned the 94 corridor. I saw some of the other reports in and around your the events surrounding this legislation being reintroduced and the public forum that you recently held. We'll get to that too. Conventions, sporting events, that there seems to be an uptick. So where are we seeing the problem at its most prevalent in the state? Absolutely.
In Michigan, of course, one of the situations where we would find folks being trafficked more frequently would be the North American Auto Show, perhaps a basketball tournament. On the west side of the state, we're seeing a lot more activity over there as well. And if you look on the internet, and a lot of it occurs, a lot of the contact occurs on the internet, Backpage.com is a frequent source of advertisements. And as an event comes closer and closer to the date, you will see the traffic increase on their site. It's amazing, and our kids and our parents, our teachers, all of us have to be far more aware of what our students, our children are doing.
Was it a question then of awareness? Was there, or were there other factors of priorities in the legislative term that we just came out of as to why your bill got to a certain point? But if we're talking about a thing where we may be number 5, as high as number 5 in the nation, one would have to ask what happened along the way in the process of that bill moving forward.
Well, our bill was a piece, and I think we looked at it. We got it through the Senate, of course, and we looked at it and realized that this is going to require much more legislation. It's going to require other pieces that tie into this. This was kind of a cleanup piece, and ironically, you know, as we started investigating and gathering information, we realized the magnitude of the problem, which I'm not sure any of us in our office exactly realize the magnitude before we started working on this. And then we started meeting people who had come out of that situation, and the stories that they tell, and the situations that they are aware of, and still now work to go back in to bring individuals out of that. It's a tremendous challenge, and it will require a lot of awareness on behalf of all of us.
You and your colleagues in the Senate are in the midst of a 4-year term. There's now obviously been the turnover to a certain degree in the House. So when you talk about complete legislation or the piece that you have reintroduced, is there more support? Is there more awareness already getting some traction on the House side to complement, supplement, and fill in the rest of addressing the issue from the State House?
Oh, I'm certain they're much more aware. Certainly, Attorney General Judy has raised the awareness with his commission. We've been working on a task force that we've set up in the Senate as well, and the committee that I chair will be working on all of these bills. We'll be running them through that committee. That's the Committee of Children, Families, and Human Services, and this we'll begin taking testimony actually this Wednesday, and we'll have Becky McDonald from her situation that she is aware of. She deals more internationally. She's from Grand Rapids, and I think as people hear the testimonies, they'll become much more determined to make a difference.
What about the public event, the forum that was held? What can you tell us about that, again, as an awareness-raising tool, and what came out of it? Your goals going in, and somewhat now taking the step back a few days removed from what was accomplished there, and where that may take the process.
We did. We had a great event earlier this month, and we brought in the Polaris Project. It's a nonprofit out of Washington, D.C. that focuses on gathering data and focuses on all the states in the country and where they are with their legislation and the impact that they're having. And they have specific goals, but the information that they share with us is significant. We had probably 150, 200 people there. And the gratifying part for me was they were people from all over the state. There's significant interest in being educated, being aware, and just knowing the signs to look for as just a citizen in Michigan wanting to make a difference.
They bring then that nationwide perspective, and again, we harken back to the numbers you mentioned, basically around number 13, perhaps in some areas of study as high as 5th in terms of most prevalent. So as they come in, what information did they or are they bringing to you that allows us to sort of compare ourselves with the factors, the warning signs, the things that we might share in common with other states versus maybe some very unique factors at play in this state that contributes to the problem?
Well, they will keep a flow chart of the legislation in each state, and I think they have 10 points that they're looking for, and their ideal, I presume, would be to get every state to adopt all 10 pieces of legislation or addressing those 10 points. And we're making progress, but we aren't there yet. Back in 2010, I believe, is when we started really looking at human trafficking, and even then, I don't think we recognized the magnitude in that it cuts across socioeconomic, geographic. It doesn't matter if we're out here in the middle of mid-Michigan. The internet's right on your desktop.
And so when you say 10 basic pieces of legislation, this addresses the most common points that kind of cut across all areas that they see as a framework that can address the problem nationwide, wherever, which for state we're talking about then?
Well, yeah, certain things, say you have a young woman, an individual who has been trafficked and is coerced into committing a crime. And then she comes out, she's been saved or rescued, I guess you could say, and then she's charged with the crime that she committed under duress while she was in that situation. That's a piece of legislation. A piece of legislation whereby if parents sell their own children into trafficking, that certainly should be addressed. And you'd think it would be a no-brainer, but it's so heinous, nobody thinks that that's even going on. So it's pieces like that, I think, that you'll see come out of this whole process. And we plan to hold hearings through the next month and beyond. And each one of those will probably add more to the puzzle and give a clearer picture.
You mentioned then the task force that you'll be running from the Senate, and also then mentioned the task force being set up by the Attorney General, Bill Judy. One and the same, separate duties, and because it gets to the question of legislation addressing awareness, do we have the resources on the streets, in the courts, to go after this as the goals of the legislation and this fight that you're waging would point to?
Exactly. And there is a difference. Of course, the Attorney General's office is charged with enforcement, and they enforce the laws that are on the books. We in the legislature are charged with drafting those laws and making sure as much as possible that we do it right and that they do address the problem without any unintended consequences. And a lot of times we do have to go back and clean them up. But I do see some similarities and yet differences. You will see a lot more activity, I think, as far as the awareness. That is part of our goal in the legislature, to build that awareness and take the information out among our districts.
Where we have seen some cutbacks in revenue sharing in the past, or just the overall budget process, are the law enforcement numbers there to provide the backup and the reinforcement to address it on the ground, on the streets?
Oh, that is a challenge. We know that. However, our law enforcement has never been shy about making sure that they get the bad guys. And interestingly enough, one of the folks we talked to who had been rescued said, you know, think about it. When you call a first responder or a fire department, they're automatically allowed into the building that they've been called to. Just making them more aware of the signs to look for, situations that they may not have noticed otherwise, but if they have that awareness in their training, they would recognize it when they get into that building. Things like that.
Has the Polaris Project then put you in touch with, or have you made contacts on your own with folks from other states to gain the wider perspective of the issue as a whole, what to watch for, and how, again, we share perhaps traits in common, and how we may be looking at the sharing of information and how it leads then to the action taken on the other side?
There has been some communication between those of us involved in other states. We've had conference calls, and usually Polaris Project organizes those. And I'll tell you, they can go on for quite some time. There's a lot of information to share and a lot to learn, and you just you build an understanding talking with your colleagues.
You mentioned that this is coming before the issue, or excuse me, before the committee, the Families and Human Services Committee. Are there other issues that are on the docket there, the committee that you chair, either in this last week as we sit down before the legislative recess, or immediately on the other side? Clearly this is a focus with those hearings. What other issues are potentially there that are being looked at currently?
Certainly there are other issues. Certainly this is taking the momentum right now. Previous to this week's committee hearing, we held a hearing regarding the licensing of foster care and the licensing of adult foster care homes, and how some homes fall into a gap where folks, you need to be aware that whether your home that you have your loved one in is licensed or it is not, because there are differences. And so we'll be shining more of a light on that in the future as well.
That takes me a little bit of aback. It would seem that in this present day and age, that seems a rather unusual statement to hear, the questioning of a license. How can we be at a situation where facilities are able to operate, provide those services, and not gain and not be fully licensed for that type of care?
Well, there are benefits of being a licensed facility, and then there are those who choose not to be a licensed facility, and part of it is in the reimbursement they get from, say, community mental health or Medicare. So a lot of things we need to look at here. And really, the consumer needs to be aware that there is a difference between a licensed home and an unlicensed home, and the services that they offer.
You are also vice chair of the Education Committee, so the same question would be there, business ahead of this week or in the time right after the 2-week break coming up?
We did have a meeting last week, and I anticipate additional meetings. I know that the House has, I believe, voted out of their Education Committee the Education Achievement Authority legislation that did not get through the legislature last year. So I presume that will be coming over to the Senate Ed Committee as well, fairly soon.
And where did that stand? Were there particular, again, a question of priorities, or how that legislation was being dealt with last term versus this?
It was a priority for some of those involved with that piece of legislation, but it's a significant piece in a lot of detail in that it impacts really every school in the state. And so I think you'll see more information coming out about that one. I believe as it comes out of the House, if they didn't change it, it puts a cap of 50 school buildings, not just school districts, but buildings. So more to come on that one, I believe.
The cap applying then to what, for those that have not followed this as closely then?
Those that are in the lowest 5% of the state, that in their achievement, their performance, and they clearly have some needs. I would say they are low-performing school districts, but they can turn around. And we've had that in the past. They have addressed their issues. Primarily, I had one in my own county that realized they were not doing as well as they should have been doing, and they got their act together. They prepared their curriculum in a different way, motivated their students and their staff, and they are on the upward climb now and doing very well.
It somewhat brings us back around to where we began in looking at the question of the emergency financial manager. Are similarities then, or have we drawn some distinction as to how the state may become more directly involved? One, looking at finances and management here in terms of performance. Does the same statute apply, or have we now taken a path that allows that state involvement, but in a different way? And this is the Civics 101 point where you get a chance to separate it and let people know.
Well, the emergency or the Educational Achievement Authority is somewhat different in that it has capped it at 50 school buildings, and they are those lowest achieving. Before they fall into financial default, and beyond that, it's really about the children and what they're learning or what they aren't learning, and there's a means to address that. We'll see how it works. Right now we have those in Detroit area. Most of them are metropolitan Detroit areas where there, I believe, are 15 in the authority that is now set up. And this has been in effect since September. We will see the end of the year what kind of achievement has been gained or lost, and we'll get a full report of that situation. In the meantime, this piece of legislation is coming through for other districts throughout the state. So it has to be deliberated very carefully because it's our children.
What is the time frame if this is brought into play for achieving that kind of turnaround? You said you'll look for the report as to how it has worked in the city of Detroit at the end of the year. Is that going to be the same across the board? Are they given a year, a 2-year window, part of a year, or does it depend on where they were at on that scale of achievement or underachievement going in before the EFA was applied?
I think that's determined in the legislation. When we'll look at that when it comes across from the House, and I'm not sure if it's changed from the last session or it's just some tweaks to the language, but there was some concern about some of the situations and the proposals in that legislation last session, so we'll see what comes forth this session. I'm sure we'll delve into that probably, I would say, in April in Education Committee.
Agriculture, economic development, health policy, military affairs. You were busy with the roles on those 4 committees as well. Any of those that bring issues to mind being addressed now or that are quickly approaching at the end of the recess? There's
always something happening in just about all of them. Economic development is always on the forefront. We meet frequently, and a lot of legislation looking at enhancing the environment for our businesses. Military and Veteran Affairs, we just passed out, we passed it out of committee last week, an enhancement for military veterans' driver's licenses, so they wouldn't have to show their papers everywhere they went. It would be right on their driver's license. Things like that kind of are no-brainers. You'd wonder why they weren't done before, but you want to do it right, and sometimes that takes time. Agriculture, great opportunities in agriculture. People don't realize what we have to offer sometimes throughout this state. It's very diverse. That stands well for this economic growth in Michigan because of the diversity of agriculture. A lot of opportunities for kids getting out of college in the ag industry, not per se, not production agriculture per se, but all the ancillary services that are offered. So, in health policy, you know, there's always going to be something with health policy, simply because we all utilize the health system.
Well, as we sit down here on a Monday, you mentioned that the hearing's getting underway on Wednesday of this week, coming before the committee regarding the human trafficking issue and all these issues, then moving forward, taking the pause through the recess, but then picking up along with all the budget negotiations and so forth. A busy time with a little bit of a respite coming, but thanks so much for providing us the update on all of these issues being taken up presently.
Well, thank you for having me. I always enjoy it.
Good to have you here. And thanks very much for your time and attention as well. As always, here on Capitol Report, our guest has been Senator Judy Emmons, Republican from Sheridan in the 33rd District. Remember that our programs are in the overnight replay heading into Wednesday mornings, and within a week we try to get those posted to our website as well. You can go to WCMU.org, click on TV, and then click on the right-hand side, there's a list of all the local productions. You'll find the link to Capitol Report for this and all of our prior programs in this season there, archived for viewing anytime that you wish. Thanks, as always, to our crew here. I'm David Nicholas. Appreciate your time, and we'll talk again.
You've been watching Capitol Report. Join us again as your elected officials speak to your concerns on current issues.